In the deep blue quiet of a Chicago high-rise, where the city lights bled through silk curtains, a man's voice broke the stillness, thick with pleasure and a desperate kind of relief. Liam's words were a breath against skin, a prayer whispered into the darkness. "Alara, oh God, Alara, you feel incredible tonight." His body moved with a rhythm of possession and worship, believing he was with his fiancée, the woman who was the steady anchor of his world. The response was not in words, but in a sound, a low, guttural moan that was deeper, hungrier than the sweet sighs he knew so well. It was the sound of a storm breaking, not a gentle rain. In the throes of passion, the difference was a fleeting, electric tremor, a note played slightly sharp, easily dismissed as a new, thrilling depth to their intimacy, but it was a deception woven into the very fabric of the night, a lie told with a shared body and a stolen name. Just a few days earlier, that same name belonged only to one woman in his life. Alara stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of their apartment, the city sprawling beneath her like a map of her own meticulously planned future. The diamond on her left hand caught the morning light, a constant, brilliant reminder of the life she had built with Liam. She was an architect, a creator of elegant, stable structures, and her own life was her finest design. Her love for Liam was like the foundations of her buildings, deep, solid, and meant to last a lifetime. He was her partner in every sense, a successful lawyer whose ambition was matched only by his devotion to her. Their love was a quiet, confident masterpiece, admired by all who saw it. But into this perfect composition, a variable had been introduced. Her twin sister, Serafina, had arrived for a visit. To see them together was to see a perfect reflection in a mirror, the same cascade of dark hair, the same curve of the lip, the same deep, thoughtful eyes. But if Alara was the image, Sarah was the fractured, wilder version seen in a shattered glass. She was an artist, a creature of impulse and chaos, and as she watched Alara and Liam, her eyes held a dangerous cocktail of love, longing, and a dark, simmering envy that coiled just beneath the surface of her playful smile. She saw their perfect world not as something to admire, but as something to covet. The envy did not begin with Liam. Not really. It was a creature born in the shared space of a womb, a silent competition that started with the first beat of two identical hearts. To the outside world, Alara and Serafina were a miracle, a perfect, mirrored pair. But from the inside, from the very core of Sarah's being, it had always felt like a race she was destined to lose by a single, crucial step. It was a story told in the quiet contrasts of their childhood, in the things left unsaid that echoed louder than any praise. It was there in the report cards spread across the dining room table, Alara's a neat row of perfect grades, her teacher's comments praising her discipline, her focus, her quiet brilliance. Sarah's card was a landscape of artistic triumphs and academic warnings, phrases like immensely creative, sitting uncomfortably next to lacks focus and does not apply herself consistently. Their parents, trying to be fair, had created two distinct narratives. Alara was the dependable one, the planner, the future. Sarah was the spirited one, the artist, the wild card. They thought they were giving them separate crowns, but Sarah always felt her crown was made of tinfoil while her sister's was forged in gold. Alara was praised for her stability, a quality that promised a successful, secure life. Sarah was praised for her passion, a quality that often led to messy, unpredictable outcomes, and came with a silent, worried sigh. She loved her sister, she truly did, with a fierce, primal bond that only a twin could understand. She would have defended Alara from any threat, except for the one that lived inside her own heart. She watched Alara move through life with an effortless grace that felt like a personal affront. Boys who were drawn to Sarah's fire would ultimately seek the warmth of Alara's steady hearth. Friends would come to Sarah for a wild night out, but they went to Alara with their secrets and their tears. Alara's life was a carefully constructed narrative, each chapter flowing logically into the next. Good grades, a top university, a promising career, and now, Liam. Liam was the final, perfect chapter that made Sarah's own story feel like a series of disconnected, chaotic scribbles. He wasn't just a man, he was a symbol. He was the handsome, successful, adoring fiancé that completed the picture of the perfect life, a life Sarah felt she had been cheated out of by a cruel twist of fate that made her the reflection and not the original. Now, sitting on the plush leather sofa in their Chicago apartment, that feeling was a constant, suffocating presence. She watched them. She studied them with the intensity of an artist observing a subject, memorizing the fine details of their intimacy. She saw the way Liam's eyes would soften when Alara entered a room, the casual, possessive way his hand would rest on the small of her back. She listened to their conversations, a blend of legal jargon from his world and architectural terms from hers, a secret language of a shared life that excluded her entirely. They spoke of futures, of mortgages, and wedding venues, and children's names whispered as a joke that was not entirely a joke. To Sarah, these were not just plans, they were territories she could never claim, treasures she could never own. The apartment itself was a testament to Alara's ordered world. Everything had its place. The books on the shelves were organized by color and subject. The cashmere throws were folded with geometric precision. The air smelled of expensive, subtle scents of sandalwood and vanilla. It was a life of quiet, confident luxury, a stark contrast to Sarah's own studio apartment, which was a beautiful, chaotic storm of half-finished canvases, turpentine smells, and clothes piled on the only chair. This envy grew into a quiet, secret obsession. When she was alone in the apartment, the space transformed from her sister's home into her personal laboratory. She would walk into Alara's closet, a sanctuary of neutral tones and expensive fabrics. She would run her hands over the silk blouses and tailored blazers, clothes designed for boardrooms and elegant dinners, so different from her own wardrobe of vintage leather and flowing paint-splattered skirts. One afternoon, she pulled out a simple cream-colored silk dress. It was a dress Alara had worn on her first anniversary with Liam. Sarah remembered the way he had looked at her that night, his eyes full of a deep, unwavering adoration. She slipped out of her own clothes and put on the dress. The silk felt cool and foreign against her skin. She stood before the full-length mirror, and for a terrifying, thrilling moment, the lines blurred. She wasn't Serafina, the chaotic artist. She was Alara, the serene architect. She practiced her sister's smile, the gentle, understated curve of the lips that was so different from her own wider, more mischievous grin. She tilted her head, mimicking the way Alara would listen intently to Liam, her expression a perfect blend of intelligence and affection. She picked up a silver-framed photograph from the nightstand. It was of Liam and Alara smiling on a sailboat, the very picture of happiness. She traced the outline of Liam's face with her fingertip, her breath fogging the glass. "Liam," she whispered, the name a strange and powerful taste in her mouth. She was not just trying on a dress. She was trying on a life, testing its weight, seeing if it could fit her own shoulders. In those stolen moments, a dangerous idea began to solidify in her mind, a rationalization that felt almost like justice. Alara, she told herself, didn't truly appreciate this perfection. She took it for granted. She had the love of a man like Liam, a passionate, intelligent man, and she gave him calm, gentle stability. But did she give him fire? Did she challenge him, surprise him, consume him? Sarah believed she could. She believed she could offer him a version of Alara that was more vibrant, more alive, more attuned to the darker, more thrilling desires that must surely live beneath his polished exterior. The envy was no longer just a passive feeling of want. It was becoming an active, hungry ambition. It whispered to her that she wasn't trying to steal her sister's life, but merely to borrow it, to show the world, and to show Liam what it could be like with just one tiny, imperceptible change. She would be Alara, but better. The campaign was a masterpiece of subtlety, a war waged in the quiet, shared spaces of the apartment, in glances held a second too long, and in touches that felt like accidents, but were engineered with the precision of a master strategist. Serafina did not try to compete with Alara on her own terms. That would have been a fool's errand. She didn't discuss modern architecture or the nuances of contract law. Instead, she began to excavate the small, unexplored spaces in Liam's life, the parts of himself that his perfect, stable relationship with Alara might not have needed to touch. She began her seduction not as a rival, but as an alternative, a secret, more exciting version of the woman he already loved. It started with proximity. When the three of them were in the kitchen, she would find reasons to be near him, her movements a fluid, predatory dance. If Liam was at the counter chopping vegetables for dinner, she would come to rinse a glass at the sink, her hip brushing against his, her hair falling for a moment against his shoulder. "Sorry," she would murmur, her voice a low hum, stepping back but not before the contact had registered, a brief, warm pressure that lingered in his mind. He would feel a jolt, an unexpected spark of electricity, but would dismiss it instantly. It was a small space. She was his fiancée's sister. It meant nothing. But it happened again and again. These fleeting, deniable moments of physical contact that began to weave a web of awareness around him. Then came the visual assault, a deliberate appeal to a more primal part of his senses. Sarah, an artist, understood the power of color and form. She knew Alara's wardrobe was a symphony of tasteful beiges, elegant grays, and sophisticated navies. So Sarah began to wear color like a weapon. One evening, as Liam was unwinding with a glass of whiskey after a long day at the firm, she emerged from the guest room, not in sweatpants or jeans, but in a simple, clinging dress of deep, blood-red silk. The dress itself wasn't overtly provocative, but on her identical frame, it was a stark, shocking contrast to the muted elegance he associated with Alara. "Is this too much?" she asked, a playful innocence in her eyes as she did a slow turn. "I found it in a little vintage shop today. I couldn't resist." She addressed the question to Alara, but her gaze was fixed on Liam, and she saw exactly what she wanted to see, a flicker of something ancient and appreciative in his eyes before he quickly looked away, clearing his throat. "No, it's a great color on you, Sarah," he managed, the compliment feeling strangely thick and clumsy in his mouth. Alara, oblivious, agreed. "It's beautiful. I could never pull that off." And in that single, innocent sentence, she drew the very line in the sand that Sarah wanted to exist. "This is me, and that is her. I am the woman you build a life with. She is the woman you desire in a red dress." The most potent weapon in her arsenal, however, was her stories. She would wait for the moments when Alara was preoccupied, on a late work call, or engrossed in her architectural drawings. In the comfortable silence of the living room, with only the city lights and the clinking of ice in Liam's glass between them, she would begin to talk. She didn't speak of the future. She spoke of a past that was a thrilling, chaotic tapestry of adventure. She told him about the time she ran out of money in Barcelona and had to make a living by painting portraits of tourists for a month. She described, with a self-deprecating laugh, a tumultuous affair with a French sculptor who used her as his muse. Her stories were filled with a raw, unfiltered humanity that felt intoxicatingly real. She would lean forward, her voice dropping to a confidential whisper. "You can't tell Alara any of this. She'd have a heart attack. She still thinks I'm her slightly irresponsible little sister." This act of sharing secrets, however trivial, created a bubble of intimacy around the two of them. It made Liam her co-conspirator. He was no longer just his fiancée's partner. He was the keeper of the wild truths of Serafina, the man who was allowed to see the parts of her that the rest of the world, including her own sister, did not. It was flattering. It made him feel worldly, trusted, and exciting by association. Liam was not a fool, nor was he unfaithful by nature. He loved Alara deeply, but he was a man who, like most people, had a small, dormant corner of his soul that craved the unexpected. His life with Alara was beautiful, but it was predictable. Serafina's presence was like a stone tossed into the placid pond of his contentment. He felt the ripples, and while he told himself he disliked the disturbance, a part of him was fascinated by it. He found himself watching her, noticing the subtle differences he'd never bothered to catalog before. Her laugh was similar to Alara's, but it was a half-octave lower, a huskier, more knowing sound. Her eyes, the same shape and color as her sister's, held his gaze for a beat longer, a silent challenge that made his pulse quicken before she would smile and look away, leaving him feeling slightly breathless and confused. He began to rationalize her behavior, becoming an unwitting accomplice in his own seduction. "She's just an artist," he would tell himself. "They're naturally more theatrical and expressive." When she touched his arm while laughing at one of his jokes, her fingers warm and lingering, he would think, She's just more tactile than Alara. It's a European thing. He was building a fortress of excuses around himself, because the alternative, to admit that his fiancée's identical twin was actively methodically seducing him, was a truth too monstrous and complicated to confront. It was easier to believe in her innocence than to acknowledge his own flickering, treacherous response to her calculated fire. The perfect structure of their life, the one Alara had designed with such care, began to fracture on a Tuesday evening. It didn't start with a whisper or a secret, but with a triumphant shout. Liam burst through the door, his face flushed with a victory so profound it seemed to light up the entire room. In his hands, he held a bottle of vintage champagne, the expensive kind they saved for monumental occasions. Alara and Sarah were in the living room, casually flipping through a magazine, and they both looked up, startled by his explosive energy. "You are looking at the newest senior partner at Sterling, Price, and Davies. San Francisco," he announced, his voice booming with pride. He expected cheers, a shower of kisses, an immediate celebration for what he saw as their incredible fortune. Alara's smile froze on her face. It was a small, almost imperceptible hesitation, but in the intricate language of their relationship, it was a seismic event. San Francisco. The words hung in the air, heavy and cold. He hadn't mentioned an opening in San Francisco. He hadn't mentioned any interviews. He had presented a decision about their collective future as a personal victory he had already won. San Francisco? Alara's voice was quiet, dangerously so. "When did this happen, Liam?" The question was simple, but beneath it lay a chasm of unspoken accusations. He missed the warning signs, blinded by his own success. "It's been in the works for a couple of months. I didn't want to say anything, didn't want to get your hopes up until it was a sure thing. But it's a sure thing, baby. They want me to start in the fall. We can find a place in Pacific Heights. You can set up a new firm. It'll be an adventure." He spoke of uprooting her life, her career, her entire world, with the casual ease of someone suggesting they try a new restaurant. Every word he said dug the knife in a little deeper. He saw her thriving architectural practice, the one she had bled and sweat for, as something portable, a hobby that could be packed up and reassembled on his command. He didn't see her clients, her reputation, the roots she had painstakingly put down in the soil of Chicago. He saw her only as an extension of himself. "Get my hopes up?" she repeated, and this time, the quiet was gone, replaced by a tremor of disbelief and rage. "My hopes? Liam, my entire life is here. My firm is here. You didn't think to have a single conversation with me about this? You just assumed I would drop everything and follow you?" The argument escalated quickly, the politeness stripped away to reveal the raw, wounded nerves beneath. It became an argument about more than just a job offer. It was about respect. It was about partnership. "Of course I assumed you'd come. We're a team," he shot back, his own pride now wounded. "This is a life-changing opportunity for us. I'm doing this for us." But she heard a different word. "For us? Or for you, Liam? It sounds like you made a decision for you and just expected me to fall in line." Serafina sat on the sofa, a silent, rapt spectator at the gladiatorial contest unfolding before her. She was a statue of feigned concern, her face a mask of sisterly worry. When the fight reached a fever pitch, she made her move, a subtle, perfectly timed interjection. "Alara," she said softly, her voice full of gentle reason. "It does sound like an amazing opportunity. Liam has worked so hard for this." It was a simple statement of fact, but its effect was devastating. It painted Alara as ungrateful, as the unreasonable one standing in the way of her partner's dream. It was a quiet, deadly betrayal, aligning herself with Liam, creating a fissure between the two sisters and pushing Alara further into isolation. Alara looked at her sister, then back at Liam, and saw them as a united front. She was suddenly the outsider in her own home. The accusation she threw back at Liam was filled with years of smaller, unspoken resentments, moments where she had felt her ambitions were quietly patronized. "She's right, isn't she?" Alara's voice dripped with sarcasm. "St. Liam, working so hard for us. Just like you worked so hard on that merger last year that you forgot our anniversary. Or the deposition that was more important than my first gallery showing. My things are always the negotiable things, aren't they?" "That's not fair," Liam yelled, his face turning red. "My career pays for this apartment, for this life." It was a low blow, and he knew it the moment the words left his mouth. He had reduced her contributions, her passion, to a financial footnote. The beautiful apartment suddenly felt like a gilded cage. The fight was broken. There was nothing left to say. A heavy, toxic silence filled the room. With a chilling calmness, Alara walked into their bedroom. The sounds that followed were brutal in their domesticity. The angry zip of an overnight bag, the opening and closing of drawers. When she emerged, her coat was on and her face was a pale, tear-streaked mask. "I can't be here tonight," she said, her voice hollow. "I need to go somewhere I can breathe." Liam stood frozen, a statue of regret. "Alara, wait. Don't do this," he pleaded, but his words were weak, swallowed by the magnitude of the damage he had done. She didn't look at him. She didn't look at her sister. She walked out the door, and the soft, final click of the lock was as loud as a gunshot. Liam was left in the wreckage. The champagne bottle sat on the counter, a mocking monument to his failed celebration. He collapsed onto the sofa, his head in his hands, the adrenaline of the fight giving way to a crushing wave of despair and self-loathing. He had been so sure, so confident. Now the silence of the apartment was his accuser. And in that silence, there was another presence, Serafina. She waited a few moments, letting the silence do its work on him, letting his guilt fester. Then, she moved. She came and sat beside him, not too close, but within his sphere of misery. She didn't say, "I told you so," or she overreacted. She simply placed a cool, gentle hand on his back. "I'm so sorry, Liam," she whispered. "Why don't you let me pour you a drink? You look like you need one." He didn't have the strength to refuse. He just nodded numbly, surrendering to the first act of comfort offered to him in the ruins of his perfect evening. The opportunity she had been patiently waiting for had arrived, not as a thief in the night, but as a welcome, sympathetic angel in his moment of greatest weakness. The whiskey did little to dull the sharp, serrated edges of his regret. Each sip was a small fire in his throat that couldn't compete with the inferno of self-loathing in his gut. Liam sat slumped on the sofa, the city lights of Chicago, a cold, indifferent audience to his personal cataclysm. The apartment, once a symbol of his success and shared happiness, now felt like a mausoleum. Every beautiful object a monument to the fight, to the look on Alara's face before she walked out. He was replaying her words, her accusations, and the horrible, arrogant things he had said in return. He was so lost in his misery that he barely registered Serafina's movements. She was a ghost in his periphery, clearing their dinner plates with a quiet efficiency, refilling his glass without being asked. She was a source of silent, unobtrusive comfort, and in his weakened state, he was pathetically grateful for it. She finally came to sit on the armchair opposite him, her expression a careful, curated blend of sympathy and concern. "She didn't mean it, you know," Sarah said, her voice soft as velvet. "She loves you more than anything. She's proud, and she's hurt. She'll cool off and she'll be back. You know she will." Her words were a balm on his raw nerves, precisely what his desperate heart wanted to believe. He looked at her, at the face so achingly familiar, and for a moment the lines blurred. "I was an idiot," he croaked, his voice hoarse. "I should have told her. I should have asked her, not just presented it like some royal decree." Serafina nodded, her eyes full of understanding. She let him talk, let him pour out all his frustration and guilt, and she listened with a patience that felt like absolution. She was the perfect confessor. After he had exhausted himself, she stood up. "I'm just going to go get comfortable," she said softly. "It feels wrong to leave you alone right now." She disappeared into the guest room, and Liam was left alone again with his thoughts and the amber glow of the whiskey. The minutes stretched on. He closed his eyes, his head spinning, and in the darkness he saw Alara's face. He would fix this. He would beg. He would give up the job, give up anything to get her back. When he heard a soft footstep, he opened his eyes, and his heart stopped. Standing in the soft ambient light from the hallway was Alara, or the perfect illusion of her. It was Serafina, but she was wearing Alara's favorite cream-colored silk robe, the one she always wore on lazy Sunday mornings. Her hair was down, falling across her shoulders in the exact same way, and she had washed her face, leaving it bare and vulnerable, just as Alara's would be. The final, devastating touch was the scent. As she moved closer, the air filled with the faint, familiar fragrance of Alara's lavender and vanilla perfume. To Liam's alcohol-soaked, grief-stricken mind, it was a miracle. His brain, desperate for resolution, refused to see the subtle differences and clung to the overwhelming similarities. He saw his fiancée return to him, ready to forgive. "Alara," he breathed, his voice breaking with relief as he stood up, stumbling slightly. Serafina didn't correct him. This was the moment. The culmination of all her planning, all her envy. She closed the distance between them and raised a hand to his cheek, her touch feather light. "Liam." "It's all right," she whispered, her voice a perfect imitation of her sister's gentle cadence. "Shh, I'm here now. Let's not fight anymore." His mind was a storm of confusion and overwhelming relief. He leaned into her touch, his eyes closing. "I'm so sorry," he mumbled against her skin. "I love you. I was so stupid, Alara. I'm so sorry." Her arms went around his neck and she kissed him. It was not a hesitant, forgiving kiss. It was a kiss of conquest, deep and hungry, but she masked its ferocity with a feigned tenderness he was in no condition to question. He responded with all the pent-up desperation of the last few hours, kissing her back with a force that was part apology, part possession. She led him, stumbling, toward the bedroom, their bedroom. The lie was so complete, so all-encompassing, that he never questioned it. In the darkness, with only the city skyline as a witness, she let the silk robe fall from her shoulders. Beneath it, she wore a black lace bra and matching underwear, something she knew Alara owned but rarely wore, a small, secret detail that would add a thrill of novelty. He would attribute to a moment of passionate reconciliation. His hands, clumsy from whiskey and desire, roamed over a body he thought he knew better than his own. It was the same height, the same weight, the same curves. He was making desperate, tender love to his fiancée, apologizing with every touch, every kiss. "Alara, God, I missed you," he groaned, burying his face in her hair, inhaling the stolen scent of her perfume. Serafina arched into him, her triumph a silent scream in her soul. She didn't speak. She let her body tell the rest of the lie. She moved against him with a fierce, abandoned energy, a passion that was slightly wilder than Alara's measured tenderness. It was a subtle difference he registered, not as a discrepancy, but as a thrilling response to their reunion, a sign of how much she must have missed him too. His hands gripped the curve of her hip, a shape he had caressed 1,000 times, and he felt at home, he felt forgiven. He was lost in the illusion, his conscience cleared by this act of physical reunion. As their bodies moved together, he whispered her name over and over, "Alara, Alara," a desperate mantra against the darkness. Serafina let the name wash over her, each utterance a victory, a confirmation of her power. She met his thrusts with an eagerness that bordered on violence, her nails digging into his back, and she moaned, a sound of pure, unadulterated pleasure that was entirely her own, but which he, in his blissful ignorance, accepted as the sound of his salvation. The first thing Liam was aware of was the brutal, punishing sunlight slicing through a gap in the curtains. The second was the rhythmic, metallic pounding in his skull, a blacksmith forging anvils behind his eyes. A groan escaped his lips as he shifted, the sheets feeling like sandpaper against his skin. But then, a wave of memory, soft and warm, washed through the hangover haze. Alara. She had come back, they had fought, and then they had made up with a desperate, all-consuming passion. A faint, relieved smile touched his lips. It was all right. Everything was going to be all right. He reached a heavy arm across the bed, seeking the familiar warmth of her body, the curve of her hip. His hand met only cool, empty linen. His eyes snapped open. The other side of the bed was undisturbed, the pillow plump and uncreased. A cold knot of confusion tightened in his stomach. He sat up too quickly, and the room spun violently. "Alara?" he called out, his voice a dry, rasping thing. The only answer was the profound, echoing silence of the apartment. He swung his legs out of bed, his body aching, his mind shrouded in a thick fog. The events of the night felt slippery, like a dream just out of reach. He remembered the fight, the door closing, the soul-crushing despair. He remembered the whiskey, bottle after bottle of it, and he remembered her return. He remembered the feel of her silk robe, the scent of her perfume, the fierce, forgiving way she had come to him, but it was all fragmented. The memory lacked the sharp, clear edges of reality. As he stood, a foreign scent hit him, faint but distinct beneath the familiar lavender and vanilla of Alara's signature fragrance. It was something muskier, earthier, a scent he vaguely associated with Serafina's art studio. He shook his head, trying to clear it. The whiskey was playing tricks on him. He stumbled out of the bedroom, his heart beginning to beat a frantic, fearful rhythm against his ribs. "Alara?" he called again, louder this time. Nothing. He walked to the guest room. The door was closed. He pushed it open. The bed was perfectly made, not a single crease in the duvet. Her overnight bag was gone. Serafina was gone. And in that sterile, empty room, the truth, in all its monstrous, unthinkable horror, crashed down upon him. It wasn't a dream, it wasn't a hallucination, and it wasn't Alara. His legs gave out and he leaned against the doorframe, a wave of nausea so intense it made him gag. His mind, his lawyer's mind, scrambled for an alternative explanation, for some plausible deniability that could save him from this reality. A dream. It had to be a drunken, vivid dream. He staggered back to the bedroom, a man searching for evidence to prove his own insanity. He looked at the empty pillow next to his, desperately trying to will an indentation into it, but his eyes caught on something. Alara's cream-colored silk robe. It wasn't on the floor where it had been dropped in a moment of passion. It was draped neatly over the back of a velvet armchair in the corner of the room, as if placed there deliberately after being worn. Alara would have tossed it. She was always the one to leave clothes in a heap. Sarah. He didn't know what Sarah would do. The image of the neatly placed robe was more damning than any confession. He felt a primal scream building in his chest, but he choked it down, the effort making him tremble. He had not made love to his fiancée. He had betrayed her, in their bed, with her own sister. The guilt was a physical entity, a venom spreading through his veins, making his skin crawl and his stomach churn. He stumbled to the bathroom and retched into the toilet, heaving up the whiskey and the shame until there was nothing left but dry, rasping sobs. He was a monster, a cheat. But even as he condemned himself, a colder, more calculating part of his mind was already at work, constructing a defense. She tricked me. I was drunk. I thought she was Alara. I was grieving. I was vulnerable. It wasn't my fault. The excuses were flimsy, pathetic shields against the colossal truth of his failure. But beneath them was a darker, more terrifying question that he didn't dare ask aloud. Was there a part of me that knew? Did he ignore the subtle signs, the slight difference in the kiss, the wilder energy in her touch, because a treacherous part of him wanted it, wanted the fire instead of the warmth? He pushed the thought away, horrified by its implications. He decided, in that moment of cold, stark panic, that this night would be buried. It would be a secret he would carry to his grave. He would become the most devoted, loving partner imaginable to atone for a sin Alara would never know he had committed. It was the only way. As if summoned by his desperate, guilty thoughts, his phone began to ring on the nightstand. The screen lit up with her picture, her beautiful, smiling, trusting face. Alara. His heart seized. He stared at the phone, his hand shaking too badly to pick it up. He let it ring out. A minute later, it rang again. He knew he had to answer. To ignore her now would be a confession in itself. He took a deep, shuddering breath and swiped the screen. "Hello?" he managed, his voice sounding alien to his own ears. "Liam? It's me." Her voice was soft, hesitant, and full of regret. "I'm so sorry about last night. I was awful. I'm at a coffee shop a few blocks away. Can we talk? I want to come home." Each loving, conciliatory word was a fresh stab of guilt. He had to choke back a sob. "Of course," he said, his voice cracking. "Yes. Please come home. I'm the one who's sorry, Alara, more than you could ever know." Miles away, Serafina walked along the shore of Lake Michigan as the sun began to cast a pale, watery light over the city. She had slipped out of the apartment before dawn, a thief disappearing into the shadows. The cold morning air felt good on her flushed skin. A fierce, electric current of triumph still coursed through her. She had done it. She had climbed to the summit of her ambition and planted a flag. The life she had watched through glass was now hers to touch, if only for a few stolen hours. She had held him, felt his body surrender to hers, heard him whisper the name she shared with her sister. It was a victory so absolute, so audacious, that it left her breathless. But as the adrenaline began to fade, a different feeling crept in, a cold, hollow emptiness that the morning sun could not warm. She replayed the night, but the memories were already souring. He had whispered Alara with such love and desperation. He hadn't been making love to her, Serafina, the artist, the wild spirit. He had been desperately seeking forgiveness from his fiancé, and she had merely been the understudy, a convincing body double in a play of his own making. The triumph felt strangely hollow, the conquest incomplete. She had won his body, but she had done it by erasing herself. In the act of stealing her sister's life, she had only proven that he desired her sister more. The cold Chicago wind whipped off the lake, and for the first time, Serafina felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. When Alara walked back through the door of the apartment, it felt like a fragile truce had been declared. The air was thick with unspoken apologies and the residue of shared pain. Liam met her in the foyer, and the way he looked at her was a portrait of pure, unadulterated desperation. He didn't just hug her. He clung to her, his arms wrapped around her as if he were a drowning man, and she was the last piece of driftwood in a raging sea. "I'm so sorry," he whispered into her hair, his voice thick with an emotion that went far beyond regret for a simple argument. "I love you. Never forget that. Whatever happens, whatever you think, just know that I love you." In that moment, feeling her own share of guilt for having left, Alara accepted his words as a beautiful, raw expression of his fear of losing her. She buried her face in his chest, inhaled his familiar scent, and believed they had weathered their first real storm and had come out the other side, stronger and more appreciative of what they had. For the first few days, this new reality felt like a gift. The fight had seemingly shocked their relationship back to life, imbuing it with a passion and attentiveness that had been quietly fading under the weight of routine and wedding planning. Liam was a different man. He was relentlessly affectionate. He would leave love notes tucked into her architectural journals. He sent flowers to her office for no reason. He would stop what he was doing just to watch her, his eyes filled with an intensity that was both flattering and, if she were being honest with herself, a little unsettling. His touch was constant, a hand on her back as she made coffee, his fingers lacing through hers as they watched a movie, his body pressed against hers all night in bed. Initially, she soaked it in, seeing it as a reassuring confirmation of his love. But soon, the sheer volume of it began to feel loud. There was a frantic, almost manic energy to his devotion. His I love yous often felt less like declarations and more like frantic questions seeking validation. It wasn't the quiet, confident love she was used to. It was a noisy, anxious performance, and she couldn't shake the feeling that he was not so much loving her as he was trying to convince himself of something. He developed strange aversions. One evening, she pulled out her cream-colored silk robe, and he visibly flinched, his face paling. "Why don't you wear the blue one?" he asked, his voice strained. "I always liked you in that one." It was a bizarre, jarring moment over such a trivial thing that she simply stared at him, before obliging just to dispel the sudden, inexplicable tension in the room. The cracks, at first, were hairline fractures, tiny inconsistencies that her logical, trusting mind was quick to plaster over. The first one appeared on a Friday night, a week after the fight. Serafina came over for dinner, slipping back into her role as the breezy, artistic sister with a seamless ease that Alara was grateful for. They were trying to be normal again. As Liam poured himself a drink, Sarah casually remarked from the sofa, "Going easy on that smoky scotch tonight, I hope. We don't want a repeat of last week." Liam froze, his hand hovering over the bottle. He shot Sarah a look of pure, undiluted panic, an expression so stark and terrified it made Alara's breath catch. Sarah, realizing her misstep, quickly backpedaled with a nervous laugh. I just mean, after a big, dramatic fight, we were all so stressed. Alara looked from her sister's forced smile to her fiancé's ashen face. She didn't know Liam had bought a new expensive bottle of peaty scotch. She had assumed he had been drinking his usual bourbon. It was a minuscule detail, but the question lodged itself in her brain. How did Sarah know the specific type of whiskey he had been drinking to excess that night, when Alara herself did not? She dismissed it. Sarah must have seen the bottle on the counter. Liam's reaction was just an embarrassed response to his sister-in-law to be teasing him for getting too drunk. It was nothing. The second crack appeared in the sterile, mundane quiet of the laundry room. As she was transferring their bedsheets from the washer to the dryer, something small and metallic glinted in the bottom of the steel drum. She picked it up. It was an earring, a single silver hoop with a small, unpolished turquoise stone hanging from it. It was beautiful, but it was not hers. Her own jewelry was minimalist, geometric, gold. This was bohemian, earthy, free-spirited. It was, in a word, Serafina. A cold feeling, heavy and unpleasant, settled in the pit of her stomach. She held the small object in her palm, her mind racing. There were 100 logical explanations. It could have fallen out of the pocket of a pair of jeans. It could belong to a friend who had visited weeks ago. But it was in the wash with their sheets, the sheets from their bed, from the night of the fight. The following day, she saw Sarah and, with a casualness she did not feel, held it out. "Hey, I think you might have lost this here." She watched her sister's face carefully. There was no flicker of recognition. Sarah just shook her head. "Nope, not mine. It's pretty though. Where did you find it?" The denial was so smooth, so utterly convincing, that Alara felt a flush of shame for her silent accusation. Of course, it wasn't Sarah's. She was being ridiculous, paranoid. She put the earring in a small dish on her dresser and tried to forget about it. But the pieces, however small, were beginning to form a picture she didn't want to see. The most unnerving change was the atmosphere between Liam and Serafina. Before the fight, they had an easy, playful rapport. He was the stable, older brother she never had, and she was the wild sister who could make him laugh. Now, a wall of glass stood between them. They were excruciatingly polite to one another. They never made eye contact. If they were in the same room, they would unconsciously position themselves as far apart as possible, creating a dead zone of tension in the space between them. The banter was gone, replaced by a stiff, formal courtesy that was far more intimate and telling than any argument. Ilara, the architect, the woman who understood how structures and spaces worked, could feel it. The social architecture of their small family was fundamentally compromised. There was a hidden, load-bearing wall that had been fractured, and everyone was pretending they couldn't see the cracks spreading across the ceiling. She told herself it was just lingering awkwardness from the fight. But her intuition, the part of her that could spot a flaw in a blueprint from 100 paces, was screaming that something was wrong. The foundation of the life she had so carefully built felt unstable, and a terrifying subterranean tremor was telling her it was about to give way. The secret Liam was keeping was not a quiet, dormant thing. It was alive. It was a cancer growing in the space between him and Alara, metastasizing with every overly affectionate touch and every hollow, heartfelt, "I love you." He began to work later and later, seeking refuge in the sterile, logical world of legal briefs and case law, a place where morality was defined by statutes, not by the treacherous landscape of the human heart. His 40th floor office, with its panoramic view of the glittering Chicago skyline, became his fortress of solitude. But he had forgotten that no fortress is impregnable. Just after 10 o'clock on a Thursday night, when the building was a silent tomb and he was buried deep in a deposition, the soft click of his office door opening made him jolt. He looked up, expecting a security guard, but it was her. It was Serafina, and tonight there was no pretense, no illusion. She was not dressed in the soft, borrowed silks of her sister. She was wearing a tight, black leather skirt that clung to her hips and a simple, dark gray cashmere sweater that hinted at the curves beneath. Her hair was loose and wild, her eyes were lined with a dark, smoky makeup, and her lips were painted a deep, challenging red. She was not a reflection of Alara. She was her own, singular, dangerous entity. Working hard? She asked, her voice a low, knowing purr that was nothing like her sister's. She closed the door behind her, the sound echoing in the cavernous silence. Liam's blood ran cold. He shot up from his chair, his hands immediately raised as if to ward her off. Sarah, what are you doing here? You can't be here. You have to leave. Now. His voice was a harsh, panicked whisper. He glanced nervously toward the glass walls of his office, terrified of who might see her. Relax, Liam, she said, sauntering further into the room, her hips moving with a deliberate, hypnotic rhythm. The cleaning crew finished an hour ago. It's just you and me up here, all alone. She ran a single manicured finger over the polished mahogany of his desk, her touch both an idle caress and a claim of territory. We need to talk about that night, she said, her eyes finally locking with his. And they were devoid of any softness, any pretense of comfort. They were the eyes of a predator. There's nothing to talk about, he said, his voice shaking. It was a mistake. A horrible, drunken mistake. It never happened, and it will never happen again. Now, for the love of God, please go. Her laugh was a short, bitter sound. A mistake? Is that what you call it? You can lie to her, Liam. You can even lie to yourself. But don't you dare lie to me. She moved around the desk, closing the distance between them, and he instinctively backed away until his legs hit the edge of the credenza behind him. He was trapped. You can't just pretend it didn't happen, she whispered, now standing so close he could feel the warmth radiating from her body. I was there. I felt you. I heard you whisper her name while you were inside me. The explicit memory, spoken aloud, was a physical blow. He flinched, a wave of shame washing over him. Stop it, he pleaded. Just stop. But she was relentless. She placed her hands on his chest, her touch a brand. No, I don't think I will. Because here's the secret you're too afraid to admit to yourself. You liked it. You can't forget it, can you? The way it felt. It felt different. It felt real. He tried to push her away, but his movements were weak, his resolve crumbling under her assault. No, he managed, but it was a pathetic, breathless protest. She leaned in, her lips brushing against his ear. Stop pretending, Liam. Alara gives you comfort. She gives you a beautiful, stable, predictable life. But I give you fire. I give you this. She moved her hips just slightly, a subtle, powerful motion against his, this feeling in your gut right now, the fear, the excitement. You haven't felt this alive in years. And he hated her for it, because she was right. His body was betraying him, a hot current of illicit desire coursing through him, battling futilely against the icy grip of his guilt. Her mouth found his, and this time, the kiss was not a gentle deception, it was a brutal claiming. It was hungry and angry and demanding, and his resistance lasted only a moment before a tidal wave of self-loathing and pure animal lust consumed him. He kissed her back with a fury that matched her own, his hands tangling in her hair, pulling her impossibly closer. It was a kiss of surrender, an admission of his own secret corruption. The act that followed was not one of intimacy, it was a collision. It was desperate and raw and almost violent, fueled by a week of suffocating guilt and forbidden craving. She pushed him back onto the cold, smooth surface of his desk, scattering legal documents to the floor. The city lights outside the window painted them in a cold, impersonal glow, two silhouettes enacting a scene of mutual ruin. Every touch was a transgression, every kiss a sin. He was no longer a victim of a deception, he was an active, willing participant in his own damnation. His initial half-hearted protests of Sarah, "No, please, we can't," quickly dissolved into ragged, guttural moans of pleasure as her hands and mouth explored him with a wild, expert knowledge of what he wanted. She was not her sister. There was no gentle tenderness, only a focused, all-consuming lust. And in the throes of it all, as his mind finally shattered and his body took over, the name that escaped his lips was not a mistake. It was a confession. It was a surrender. Oh God, Sarah. The name hung in the air, the ultimate validation she had been craving. She had won. He wanted her. After it was over, there was no soft afterglow, no tender whispers. There was only the harsh sound of their breathing in the cold, quiet office. She disentangled herself from him immediately, her movements efficient and detached. As she adjusted her skirt and sweater, she looked at him, sprawled on his desk, a man utterly broken by his own weakness, and there was no love in her eyes. There was only a cold, chilling glint of triumph. Without another word, she turned and walked out of his office, leaving him alone in the wreckage, the damning sound of her name still echoing in the silent, unforgiving room. The human mind has an astonishing capacity for self-deception. For weeks, Alara had lived in a state of willful ignorance, diligently plastering over the cracks in her life with the flimsy mortar of trust and denial. She told herself that Liam's desperate, clinging affection was a trauma response to their fight. She convinced herself the tension between him and her sister was just lingering awkwardness. She decided the turquoise earring was a meaningless anomaly. She chose to believe in the structural integrity of her life because the alternative was unthinkable. But an architect knows that a building with a compromised foundation cannot stand forever. Sooner or later, the laws of physics and of truth will assert themselves. The breaking point came not with a bang, but with a quiet, mundane discovery. She was cleaning her jewelry, a calming, methodical ritual, and her fingers brushed against the small dish on her dresser where she had placed the forgotten earring. She picked it up, intending to finally throw it away, but she paused. She looked at the small, alien object in her palm, and this time, she didn't see a coincidence. She saw a clue. The paranoia she had been suppressing for weeks rose up, no longer a vague mist, but a cold, sharp-edged certainty. Something was wrong. That night, after Liam was asleep, his breathing heavy beside her, Alara slipped out of bed and went to her home office. The analytical, meticulous part of her brain, the part that designed buildings meant to withstand storms and earthquakes, took over. She was no longer a loving fiancé operating on faith. She was an investigator examining a scene. She took out a crisp, blank sheet of paper from her drafting table and drew a single vertical line down the middle. At the top, she wrote the date of the fight. With chilling precision, she began to reconstruct the timeline. 9:15 p.m. The fight reaches its peak. 9:45 p.m. She leaves the apartment. She remembers the exact time because she had looked at the clock in her car. 10:30 p.m. She arrives at her friend's house. The next morning, 8:15 a.m. Her phone call to Liam. She remembered his voice, not just relieved, but strained, broken. He had sounded like a man confessing to a crime. On the other side of the line, she wrote down what she knew of Serafina's movements. She had been there during the fight. She had supposedly stayed to comfort Liam, but when had she left? Liam had been vague, saying she left sometime late after he fell asleep on the sofa. This was where the story felt weak. This was the untested variable. Driven by a cold, clinical need for data, she opened their shared tablet. Her finger hovered over the ride-sharing app they both used. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This felt like a betrayal, a violation of the trust she was trying so hard to believe in, but her intuition screamed at her that the greater betrayal had already occurred. She opened the app and checked the trip history. And there it was. A single trip, logged on Liam's account. Pickup, their address. Time, 4:58 a.m. Destination, Serafina's studio apartment, 4:58 a.m. Not late. Not after he fell asleep. It was the deepest, darkest hour of the night. A time for secrets and lovers, not for a sister-in-law innocently heading home. The digital receipt on the screen was a cold, impartial witness. It didn't have a motive. It didn't lie. It was a fact, and it ripped a hole through the carefully constructed narrative she had been telling herself. She felt a wave of dizziness, the room tilting slightly. She now had a timeline, and within it, 5 missing, unaccounted-for hours where her fiancé and her identical twin sister were alone in her apartment, in her life. Armed with this single, sharp piece of evidence, she decided she would confront her sister one last time. She needed to see her face, to hear her voice as she presented her with the lie. She arranged to meet Sarah for coffee the next afternoon at a small, neutral cafe downtown. She arrived first, chose a secluded table in the corner, and waited. When Sarah arrived, all breezy smiles and sisterly affection, Alara felt a profound and sickening disconnect from the woman who shared her face. She let Sarah order, let her chatter for a few minutes about a new art commission, and then she calmly slid her phone across the table, the screen displaying the trip details. "I have a question, Sarah," Alara said, her voice unnervingly steady. "Liam told me you left late that night, after he fell asleep on the couch, but this says you left at 5 in the morning. Can you explain that to me?" Serafina's smile didn't falter, but Alara, watching with the hypervigilance of the betrayed, saw a flicker, a microsecond of panic in her eyes before it was expertly extinguished. What followed was a masterclass in psychological warfare. Sarah looked at the phone, then back at Alara, her face transforming into a mask of deep, profound hurt. "Are you serious?" she asked, her voice trembling with manufactured disbelief. "You're timing my movements?" "What is this, Alara? An interrogation?" Alara held her ground. "It's a question, just answer it." Sarah leaned back, crossing her arms, her hurt instantly morphing into righteous indignation. "Fine. You want an answer? Your fiancé was a wreck. A complete mess. He drank himself into a stupor, and I was worried he'd do something stupid. I stayed to make sure he was okay. I must have fallen asleep on the sofa. I was exhausted. I woke up when it was still dark, and I left because I didn't want it to be awkward in the morning. I was trying to protect you, to protect your relationship. And this is the thanks I get? You investigate me like I'm some kind of criminal?" Every word was a weapon, designed to make Alara feel ashamed, guilty, paranoid. Sarah's eyes filled with tears, and it was a devastatingly effective performance. "My God, Alara, I know you were upset, but I never thought you were this insecure. Are things so bad between you and Liam that you have to invent this sordid fantasy about me? Your own sister?" The gaslighting was so total, so audacious, that Alara's carefully constructed case began to crumble. Sarah's explanation, while fitting the timeline a little too neatly, was plausible. Her emotional reaction was so convincing that Alara's certainty began to waver, replaced by a horrifying, creeping doubt in her own mind. Was she going crazy? Was she so damaged by their fight that she was willing to destroy her relationship with her sister over a series of coincidences? She left the cafe feeling utterly defeated, her mind a fog of confusion and self-doubt. Sarah's denial had been too perfect, her performance too flawless. And that, Alara realized as the cold Chicago wind hit her face, was the most suspicious thing of all. She had her answer. She just couldn't prove it. There was only one person left to ask. The one person who had no reason to be a perfect actor. She did not confront him the moment he walked through the door. To do so would have been to give in to the chaotic, swirling storm of rage and pain inside her, and the architect in her refused to cede control to chaos. Instead, she performed the quiet rituals of their evening routine with a terrifying robotic calm. She asked about his day. She plated the dinner she had prepared. She sat opposite him at their polished dining table and listened to him talk about a difficult client, all the while the unspoken truth sat between them like a third, spectral guest. Liam, for his part, could feel the change in the atmosphere. The air in the apartment was heavy, charged, like the moments before a lightning strike. Alara's calm was not the gentle, peaceful calm he knew. It was the eerie, unnatural stillness of the deep ocean. He found himself talking too much, filling the silence that she was creating, his own anxiety growing with every passing moment he spent under her cool, unreadable gaze. After dinner, she spoke. "Liam," she said, her voice perfectly even, betraying none of the turmoil within. "Can we talk in the living room? There's something we need to discuss." She didn't wait for his answer, but walked to the sofa and sat down, her posture erect, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She was not a wife preparing for an argument. She was a prosecutor about to deliver her opening statement. He followed, his heart beginning a slow, heavy drumbeat of dread. He sat in the armchair opposite her, the same one Sarah had occupied the night his world had tilted on its axis. The space between them felt miles wide. Alara began not with an accusation, but with a presentation of facts. Her voice, the calm, measured tone she used with contractors. "I'm trying to understand some things, Liam, and I need your help. I'm hoping you can provide some clarity." She spoke of the new bottle of peaty scotch, the one he drank the night she left. She spoke of Serafina's oddly specific knowledge of it. She spoke of the single turquoise earring she had found in their laundry among their bed sheets. And finally, she spoke of the Uber receipt, the digital ghost that placed her sister leaving their home at 5 o'clock in the morning. She laid out each piece of evidence without emotion, without interpretation, a series of undeniable, disconnected facts. Sarah tells me she was just concerned, Alara concluded, her eyes finally locking onto his. She says she fell asleep on the sofa and left early so it wouldn't be awkward. That's her explanation. Now I need to hear yours. Liam's face, which had been progressively losing color with each piece of evidence she presented, was now a ghastly shade of pale. He was sweating. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He swallowed hard, his throat clicking. His first instinct was to lie, to cling to the fragile narrative he and Sarah had, by unspoken agreement, constructed. She's right, he stammered, his eyes darting around the room, unable to meet her steady gaze. That's exactly what happened. I was a mess, Alara. She was just being a good sister. She fell asleep on the couch. The lie was pathetic. It was a child's defense, transparent and weak, and the sound of it in the quiet, tense room was an insult to her intelligence. Alara didn't raise her voice. She didn't call him a liar. She simply continued to look at him, her expression one of profound, soul-weary disappointment. The silence she held was more damning than any accusation. It gave his lie no air to breathe, and it suffocated and died between them. She had given him a chance to tell her the truth, and he had chosen to try and build one last flimsy wall to hide behind. She leaned forward slightly, her gaze so intense it felt like a physical weight. She didn't need the earring, she didn't need the timeline. She had her answer in his shifting eyes and the tremor in his hands. "Look at me, Liam," she commanded, her voice dropping to a whisper that was somehow more powerful than a shout. He forced his eyes to meet hers, and what he saw there made his blood run cold. It was not anger he saw, not yet. It was a look of chilling forensic clarity, as if she were seeing him, truly seeing him for the very first time. "It was her, wasn't it?" she asked. The words soft, precise, and utterly devastating. That night, in our bed. The question hung in the air, a pendulum swinging between them, marking the final seconds of their life together. Liam's entire body seemed to collapse in on itself. A terrible, ragged sob tore itself from his throat, a sound of such complete and utter brokenness that it seemed to physically pain him. The dam of his denial, his guilt, and his terror finally burst. He fell from the chair to his knees on the expensive rug, his body shaking with uncontrollable convulsions of grief. "Yes," he choked out, the word barely audible. His confession was a torrent of pathetic, jumbled excuses, the desperate pleas of a guilty man begging for a lesser sentence. "But I swear to God, Alara, I was so drunk. I thought it was you. I came to bed and she was there. She was wearing your robe. She smelled like you. In my head, it was you. It was you, coming back to me, I swear it." Alara did not move. She sat there, a statue carved from ice, and listened to the single most wounding confession a person could ever hear. It wasn't just that he had slept with her sister, it was that he had done it believing he was with her. Her identity, her face, her scent, her very essence had been used as the tools in her own violation. Serafina had not just slept with her fiancé, she had worn Alara's life like a costume to do it. The betrayal was so absolute, so profoundly twisted, that her mind couldn't immediately process it. There was no screaming, no rush of tears. There was only a vast, empty, silent shock. The foundation of her world hadn't just cracked, it had been vaporized. She was floating in a cold, black void. When she finally spoke, her voice was a dead, hollow thing. "Did you call my name?" she asked. The clinical curiosity of the question, a terrifying measure of her detachment. Liam looked up, his face a mess of tears and mucus. "Yes," he sobbed, over and over, and that was it. That was the final, killing blow. The sound that finally escaped her was not a cry of sadness, but a low, guttural sound of pure, primal pain. The sound of a soul being torn in two. The perfect life she had designed was now a smoldering ruin, and she was standing alone in the ashes. The confession did not bring catharsis, it brought contagion. The truth, once released from the confines of secrecy, did not cleanse the wound. Instead, it infected all three of them, spreading like a poison through their minds, unraveling the very fabric of their identities. There were no more secrets to uncover, no more confrontations to be had. There was only the long, silent, and solitary process of ruin. The great unraveling had begun, a psychological reckoning that played out not between them, but within the haunted, private theaters of their own minds. For Elara, the architect, a woman whose mind was trained to construct, the unraveling took the form of an obsessive, involuntary act of creation. Her imagination, once a tool for building beautiful, stable worlds, now turned on her with a vicious, meticulous cruelty. It began to build the scenes of the betrayal, rendering them in excruciating, high-definition detail. She would be sitting at her drafting table, and without warning, the image would flash behind her eyes. The specific way the light from the hallway would have caught the silk of her robe as it pooled around her sister's feet. She would be walking down the street and would be assaulted by a phantom sound, the desperate, loving way Liam would have whispered her name as he made love to the wrong woman. These sensory details, which she had not witnessed but knew with a primal, cellular certainty, became her personal tormentors. Her own body became a foreign country, a landscape of triggers. The lavender and vanilla perfume she had worn for years now smelled of deception. The cream-colored robe was a cursed object she couldn't bear to look at, yet couldn't bring herself to throw away. The most profound torture, however, was the mirror. Every reflection became a confrontation. She would look at her own face in the morning and see the curve of the lips that had kissed her fiancé, the dark eyes that had watched him surrender. Her shared face, once a source of innocent fun and a unique secret bond, was now her permanent, inescapable curse. She saw her betrayer in her own reflection, a constant, silent reminder that the person who had destroyed her life looked exactly like her. Her love for Liam, a solid, foundational thing, did not just die, it transmuted into a cold, hard contempt. But her feelings for Serafina were a far more complex and agonizing poison, a hideous cocktail of pure, undiluted hatred, tangled with the grief of a love that had been with her since the womb. She was utterly, completely alone, haunted by a ghost who wore her own face. For Liam, the unraveling was a descent into a gray, suffocating fog of memory and guilt. The apartment was his prison, each room a different cell of torment. In the bedroom, he saw the specter of his betrayal. In the living room, he heard the echo of their final, terrible fight. He was haunted not by one woman, but by a terrifying fusion of the two. In his sleepless, whiskey-soaked nights, the memories of his two encounters with Serafina began to bleed into one another, creating a single, monstrous memory loop. He would remember the first night, the deceptive tenderness, the belief that he was being forgiven by Elara, but the memory would be tainted with the raw, aggressive lust of the second encounter. He would remember the thrill of the second night in his office, the validation of shouting Sarah's name, but the memory would be poisoned by the ghost of Elara's trust and the crushing weight of his initial, pathetic excuse. "I thought it was you." The two sisters merged in his mind into a single, two-headed creature of his own making, one face offering love and the other offering fire, both condemning him. His self-deception had completely disintegrated, forcing him to face the ugliest truth of all. He could no longer hide behind the excuse of being tricked. The second encounter had been a choice, a conscious, willing surrender to the darkest, weakest part of himself. He had wanted the fire, and he had willingly let it burn down the cathedral of his life for a moment of heat. The question that tormented him was no longer, how could she do this? But the far more terrible, how could I? He was a man adrift, stripped of his own moral compass, left to drown in an endless, repeating loop of his own profound and unforgivable failure. And for Serafina, the architect of all this pain, the unraveling was the cold, desolate dawn after a Pyrrhic victory. The news of the confession reached her via a single ice-cold text from Elara that contained only 7 words. "I know everything. Don't ever contact me again." The message didn't feel like a defeat, it felt like an irrelevance. The thrill of her conquest, both the deceptive first act and the validating second, had evaporated entirely, leaving behind a bitter, chemical residue of shame. Her triumph was utterly, completely hollow. She had gotten the man, she had won the secret battle, she had been waging her entire life. But the prize was worthless. She would sit in her chaotic studio, surrounded by her vibrant, passionate canvases, and feel nothing. The fire that had driven her art and her envy had consumed itself, leaving only ashes. She replayed the nights with Liam, but saw them now with a humiliating clarity. She had not seduced a man. She had exploited a moment of weakness in a relationship. She hadn't won his heart or his desire. She had merely been a convenient, forbidden vessel for his grief and his lust. He had never truly seen her. The first night, he saw her sister. The second night, he saw an escape. Her great victory was nothing more than being a temporary, exciting drug for a man in crisis. And for that, she had committed the only unforgivable sin. She had destroyed her other half. She had taken the one person in the universe who was intrinsically, biologically linked to her and had annihilated that bond for a prize she didn't even want. She was the victor, but she had lost the only thing that had ever truly mattered. She was alone, finally, in a life of her own making, a life where she was no longer the shadow, but a solitary, tragic figure standing in the ruins of a world she had single-handedly destroyed. There is no grand, cinematic explosion when a world ends. There is only a series of quiet, administrative tasks. The wedding was canceled via a short, sterile email sent by Alara's lawyer. The beautiful apartment, once a vessel of their shared future, was placed on the market, its rooms of happy memories exorcised by the neutral scent of fresh paint and the hollow echoes of real estate agents. Their possessions were divided with a cold, contractual precision, photographs and furniture and art reduced to items on a checklist. Liam moved out, disappearing into a generic downtown rental, a man demoted from a life he had helped build to a life he merely occupied. There were no final, tearful goodbyes, no dramatic pleas for forgiveness. Their great love did not die in a blaze of glory. It was simply liquidated, its assets dissolved until nothing was left but the signature on a final piece of paper. The end was not a tragedy, it was a transaction. 2 years passed. Time, which is supposed to heal all wounds, instead gave Alara's scars the space to settle deep into her bones. She had left Chicago, unable to bear the architectural ghosts of her past life. She moved to Seattle, a city of soft rain and evergreen trees, a place where the sky often wore a veil of gray that matched the quiet melancholy of her soul. She started a new firm, a small, successful practice that specialized in minimalist, light-filled homes. She was functional, she was respected. From the outside, she was a portrait of resilience, a woman who had rebuilt her life from the ground up. But her new life was a structure built on a haunted foundation. She had friends, but no confidants. She dated occasionally, but her heart remained a locked, empty room. She could never fully trust anyone again, because the ultimate betrayal had come from a face identical to her own. The haunting was a quiet, constant companion, but one rainy Tuesday afternoon, it chose to show its face. She was walking back to her office after a client meeting, a black umbrella held aloft against the persistent drizzle. She felt a rare, fleeting moment of peace, the city's rhythm, a soothing, anonymous hum. She passed a gallery, its large, dark window acting as a perfect, polished mirror against the gray afternoon light. She glanced at her reflection, a woman in a black trench coat, her dark hair beaded with moisture, her expression composed. But then, for a single, heart-stopping second that stretched into an eternity, the reflection changed. The woman in the glass was still her, but the composed expression was gone, replaced by a slow, triumphant, and deeply cruel smirk. It was a look of pure, unadulterated victory. It was Serafina's smirk. Alara froze on the sidewalk, her blood turning to ice water in her veins. She stared, breathless, as the smirk lingered, a venomous ghost wearing her face, before the illusion shattered and her own shocked, horrified expression returned. She stumbled back, her umbrella clattering to the wet pavement. It was just a trick of the light, a momentary warp in the glass, a phantom born of trauma and exhaustion. But she knew, with a certainty that chilled her to her core, that it was the truest thing she had seen in 2 years. She could move cities, change her life, build 1,000 new walls, but she could never escape the face of her betrayer, because every morning, it stared back at her from her own mirror. Liam never moved to San Francisco. The ambition that had once burned so brightly in him was extinguished that night. He stayed in Chicago, a ghost haunting the periphery of a life he had thrown away. He was a competent lawyer, but the spark was gone. He became a man of quiet routine and unspoken regrets, his relationships with women brief and superficial, always ending when they got too close to the hollow, broken thing at his core. He was condemned to live forever with the memory of a woman with two faces, never sure which one he had truly desired and which one he had truly destroyed. As for Serafina, she got the city. She stayed, the solitary victor on an empty battlefield. She tried, in the beginning, to reach out to Alara, sending texts and emails that were never answered, leaving voicemails that were never heard. She was finally free of the comparison, the shadow of her perfect twin, but the freedom was a desolate, silent expanse. The fire in her art dwindled to a spark, her work becoming technically proficient but emotionally vacant. She had won, but her prize was a profound, self-inflicted isolation, the curse of being a twin whose other half was now just a ghost. The story, in the end, was not about an affair. It was about a theft of trust, of love, of a future. But for Alara, it was something more profound. It was a theft of self, a fracturing of her own identity. Some wounds leave scars you can hide, but hers was a wound that looked back at her from every reflection, a constant, whispering reminder that the deepest betrayals come from the places we least expect, sometimes even from a face that is supposed to be our own.